Theranos, a company once valued at $9 billion, is worth zero today. It was supposed to revolutionize the healthcare industry. With just a single drop of blood, over 100 tests could be ran in real time. Now, the company was led by Elizabeth Holmes, who was anointed the next Steve Jobs. She wore black turtlenecks, spoke in a deep baritone, and had huge blue eyes that drew you in. She was backed by prominent investors like Tim Draper, Larry Ellison, the Walton family, and more, and all invested in her vision. Forbes crowned her the youngest billionaire, but her billion-dollar empire was built on lies and deceit. This is the rise and fall of Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes was born in 1984 to a well-connected family. Her mother, Noelle Holmes, worked as a congressional staffer, while her father, Christian Holmes, was the vice president of Enron before it collapsed. He later go on to work for various government agencies. She was initially raised in Washington, D.C., before her family moved to Houston, where she attended St. John's, a prestigious private school. From a young age, Elizabeth had aspirations of being a billionaire. Now, some may find this odd, but Elizabeth was supposed to be born into an extremely wealthy and prestigious family. Her great-great-grandfather, Christian Holmes, was a surgeon and the namesake of Cincinnati General Hospital. He married Betty Fleischman, making her the great-great-great-granddaughter of Charles Fleischman and heir to the massive Fleischman yeasting fortune. The Fleischman Yeasting Company was the first company to produce active dry yeast. They revolutionized the baking industry, and by the end of the 20th century, the Fleischman family was one of the wealthiest families in America. They were movers and shakers. Beyond yeast, they owned a popular distillery. They helped fund the New Yorker. They partly owned the Cincinnati Red. They had a huge 42-room mansion with 40 servants, polo field, yachts. Heck, they even bought Coconut Island. But by the time Elizabeth was born, the family had squandered the fortune. The family had struggled to come to terms with their loss of status. Her parents believed that Elizabeth would be the one to right the ship. She was an entrepreneur in high school, selling CCC Plus compilers, which is a software that translates computer code to Chinese university. Elizabeth was very intelligent. She made straight A's in high school. Her parents even hired a private tutor to teach her and her brother Mandarin. She'd eventually convinced someone at Stanford into allowing her to take college-level courses in Mandarin at Stanford's summer program, which also included a trip to Beijing. Now, during her trip to Beijing, she met Sunny Balwani, who interfered with her being bullied. They'd eventually develop a friendship, although he was 20 years her senior. Balwani had a background in technology. He worked for Microsoft and Lotus before joining a startup, CommerceBid.com, where he'd eventually became the president and CTO. The company was acquired before the dot-com boom, and he walked away with $40 million. He was who Elizabeth aspired to be, and he'd play a huge role in her life. Perhaps it was fate that they met the summer before she started Stanford. Now, she initially wanted to be a doctor, but due to her fear of needles, the plan was immediately throttled. So she went to Stanford to study chemical engineering. While at Stanford, she filed her first patent, a disposable patch that administered medication, monitored patient blood, and adjusted the dosage as needed. Although she'd been forewarned on multiple occasions by Professor Phyllis Gardner that it wasn't feasible because the antibiotics she wanted to use needed to be given at a higher dose than a patch could deliver. Elizabeth just ignored that sound advice and did what she wanted to do anyway. Now, this was an early warning sign that Elizabeth didn't like hearing the word no, and that she refused to adhere to wise counsel. Elizabeth then came up with the idea for Theranos. Her grand idea was to get a vast amount of data from just a few drops of blood drawn from a finger prick instead of a traditional blood test that required tubes of blood. She ran this idea by several professors, and they all tried to explain to her that it wouldn't work. Due to the multitude of tests Elizabeth wanted to run, it would be virtually impossible to get an accurate result from her fingerprint. There wasn't enough blood, and it was unreliable for nuanced readings. Once again, Elizabeth didn't heed sound advice. Instead, she sought someone who'd tell her yes and back her idea. And she found it in her advisor, Channing Robertson. Robertson would play an integral part in her early career. He introduced her to venture capitalists, and he'd eventually join her board. In 2003, Elizabeth dropped out of Stanford. She was 19 years old and had decided to chase her dreams and started Real Time Cures, aka Theranos, which is a combination of therapy and diagnosis. Elizabeth wanted to revolutionize healthcare and make blood testing accessible and affordable to all, but she didn't have the money to fund the company. Elizabeth initially targeted traditional healthcare scientists venture capital, but they turned her away due to her lack of knowledge. So she leveraged her family connections and got a meeting with her former neighbor, Tim Draper, a billionaire and venture capitalist who invested $1 million into her company. Her father used his connections to get her a meeting with Don Lucas. Don Lucas then connected her with Larry Ellison, who would eventually invest $100 million into the company. With his seal of approval, the floodgates opened. Elizabeth scored a meeting with former Secretary of State George Shultz, who connected her with Harry Kissinger. At the height of Theranos' success, she had former Wells Fargo Richard Covenant, James Mathis, the U.S. Marine Corps General, who later became Trump's Secretary of Defense. Her board was loaded with powerful white men who didn't know anything about the medical industry or blood testing, although they would help attract other rich and powerful investors. But there was one stipulation you had to follow. Elizabeth didn't have to show the investors how Theranos technology worked, and she'd have the final say over everything that had to do with the company. Fast back to 2004. Elizabeth at the time has raised $6 million, first of almost $700 million. Theranos' business model was simple yet intriguing. The blood test would be done by a cartridge and reader system, and this is how it was supposed to work. A person's finger is pricked, then a collection tube is placed to the puncture so the blood leaks into the nanotainer tube. The sample is then placed into a cartridge before it is placed into the Edison. The Edison is named after Thomas Edison, the famous inventor. The Edison was supposed to process hundreds of blood tests and detect diseases like STDs, cancers, even high cholesterol, and it was all done in real time. The Edison was also portable and could be used almost anywhere, even on a battlefield. Theranos planned to undercut Medicaid and Medicare prices, and this could have potentially saved the government $200 billion over the next decade. It would also disrupt the medical industry by democratizing the testing process. Now, anyone could get a test ran at a pharmacy or a lab and get the results within minutes, instead of the traditional method, which required needles and multiple tubes of blood that are sent to a lab and placed in a huge machine. Then the results are deciphered. It could take up a week to receive results. Theranos planned to scale down the traditional machine and cut down the waiting process. The idea was revolutionary. Elizabeth marketed the product as such. She was everywhere, from high-profile panels to TED Talks, selling Theranos as a product that could save lives. She often told the story of losing her favorite uncle to cancer as the reason why she started Theranos. Her favorite quote,
"No one ever has to say goodbye too soon."
But the truth is, she didn't even know her uncle. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.